What's up everybody, this is Danny, and today I'm going to be doing the camera comparison between the OnePlus 9 Pro and the new OnePlus 10 Pro. And I swear this was 2022, but you are looking at 1080p front-facing video from both of these. It's kind of hard to believe. But I want to see if the OnePlus 10 Pro is worth upgrading to and see if it's really any better than the OnePlus 9 Pro, because it got a lot of software updates and I think it's a pretty solid camera system. So let's go ahead and compare these in every aspect and see if it's worth upgrading to. Let's go ahead and do this. First, let's talk about the testing process. Everything that you're seeing today was shot in auto. All of the images and video are straight out of the camera with zero edits. This is exactly what you can expect if you pick either one of these phones up. This is the Chinese variant of the OnePlus 10 Pro. It's not released yet in the US, but I picked it up from 28mobile.com, so I'll leave a link below if you want to pick one of these up early. But if anything changes on the US release, I will follow up, so make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. During the day, both of these take great shots, but there are some differences that I noticed over the weekend, so let me tell you about them. Both of these phones have the same main sensor, so as expected, the results are very similar, but the biggest difference that I noticed is the color tuning from both of these phones. The OnePlus 10 Pro tends to land on the less saturated side, which I prefer. The color replication is more natural overall, which I appreciate, so I like the direction that this is moving in. The thing that I saw right away is the more aggressive change in white balance and the taming of the color red across the images. Take a look at the sky here and the red bricks here. This is a drastic difference. This makes for a more pleasing picture overall, and I really dislike the magenta cast on OnePlus cameras of the past, and this seems to alleviate that problem. Look at the clouds here, it's more white than it is red. And while the change in processing isn't super dramatic, the specular highlights on the clouds are maintained along with balancing the rest of the image well. And in this picture again, it looks very similar, but the oversaturation of the green space is so noticeable on the OnePlus 9 Pro. Here's a shot with AI enabled, and look at that purple cast all over the sky here, where the OnePlus 10 Pro handles it well with that deep blue sky that a lot of people like, even though that is not accurate. But turn off that AI mode and the OnePlus 10 Pro gets it right, and the colors just look so much better. So this is what you can expect if you're upgrading from a OnePlus 9 Pro in terms of color improvement. Take a look at this one when my daughter dressed up like a 100-year-old for a school activity the other day. I had to share this one, it's just too cute. But look at that skin tone, so much smoother and more accurate on the 10 Pro. While some might really like the more contrasty look of the OnePlus 9 Pro, I do like the color replication better on the 10 Pro, especially on portrait mode. I know most of you would pick the left image, but that's not what it looked like at all. It's almost hard to believe that sometimes these images are coming from the same company because they do look so different, but this could be because of Oppo's camera processing moving over to the OnePlus, and that's not a bad thing because I generally prefer the colors from the newer phone better. I think a lot of this has to do with the 10-bit color feature that has landed on the 10 Pro from the Oppo devices. It does give the photos more color volume, and I'm not talking about saturation. Take a look at here in this flower shot. I'm talking about how much better the purple is represented on the 10 Pro. Here it is punched in so you can see the difference in color. It's less saturated for sure, but so much better, and it's also much sharper. Look at the detail on the petals, so it's kind of wild that you can get these results from the same sensor with just different software. Look at this shot for example, similar bokeh or background blur, but just look at how much more detail is retained on the OnePlus 10 Pro. Generally there's an improvement all around, but it wouldn't be a camera comparison if the OnePlus 9 Pro didn't do better sometimes, and in some situations it will, and sometimes that extra saturation really does help the 9 Pro, and in this shot the shadow bump really makes this a more pleasing shot all around. This one really brings out the red of the building and makes it ready to share right out of the camera, and the downside of the flatter processing on the 10 Pro can make some of these scenarios just come out flat like this one. Is such a dramatic difference. With food shots, it's the same thing. The extra saturation can make the food look more pleasing, but if you're a fan of a sharper food shot, then you will probably prefer the OnePlus 10 Pro. When you punch in, you can see the texture of the painted chocolate here. And this is the best example, a picture of this empanada from Epcot's Encanto booth. They both look similar, but when you crop in, you can see a clear difference in details. So let me know which one that you prefer in the comments below. The only sensor that is different on the back of the OnePlus 10 Pro is the 50 megapixel wide angle, so I wanted to test it out, but I was surprised to see that the 48 megapixel sensor of the OnePlus 9 Pro is actually picking up more detail when you punch in. Look at the detail here on the actual board itself, and here, It's much better on the OnePlus 9 Pro in this shot. I did notice that the OnePlus 10 Pro does let a lot more noise happen on the high resolution shots to try to pull the most detail possible. You can see the more aggressive noise reduction here on the 9 Pro, but the over sharpening is very noticeable on the 10 Pro. This is another shot here, almost looks faded on the 9 Pro because of the noise reduction, but when you crop in, you can see how much sharper the 10 Pro is, but it does need some noise reduction, so a mixture of these two would be really nice. Now here you can see when that extra sharpness is a good thing. I'm assuming that this is the software making up for it actually being a smaller sensor, but you can see that the subjects are clearer here on the 10 Pro. But when it comes to the ultra wide, I wouldn't call this an upgrade, but I also don't think it's as bad as what some people are making it out to be. Here are a couple examples of the 3.3x zoom. I'm not seeing a huge difference. If anything, the OnePlus 9 Pro might even look a little better to make things even more confusing. Here's a good example, a 3.3x shot off the bridge right before France at Epcot. When you punch in, you can see that the wall details better on the OnePlus 9 Pro, and so is the art. The front-facing camera is also new at 32 megapixels, and it also has the same improvements, sharper image with better skin tone as you can see here. It also has a wider field of view, which I really like, and I'm liking that the skin rendition is better because my skin is an orange, and in portrait mode, it's the same result. I love the fact that it doesn't crop in portrait mode either. They both can shoot up to 8K video, which you're seeing here, but the reason why the 10 Pro looks so choppy is that it's in 24 frames per second instead of 30 frames per second on the 9 Pro, and before you say why is the frames per second lower, it's actually harder to process 24 frames per second than it is 30 frames per second, and it's very welcome for cinematography, which I like, so I can't wait to shoot with this more. But when it comes to regular video, unfortunately, both of these cameras are still exporting in Rec 2020 when you take the videos off of your phone. So you're going to get some crazy saturated colors, so that's why my son's skin is looking like this. But there is a color improvement straight out of the camera on the 10 Pro if you look. This is from the same distance, but the depth of field looks nicer on the 10 Pro, which really doesn't make any sense. But if you want to get a very cinematic and less saturated look here, this is what it looks like when it's converted back to Rec 709 with the exact same LUT. The camera output itself is nearly identical, so if you're a creator looking to use this as a video tool, you can definitely do it with both of these. Here's another example of the video untouched at 4K 30 frames per second. Some might actually love that saturated video of the 9 Pro. It really makes that water pop, even though it's not even near the real color of that water, but I wanted to show you this so you know what you're going to get in terms of improvement in video processing on the OnePlus 10 Pro. As expected, the stabilization is about the same, so let me know if you can actually see a difference. To me, they both look pretty much identical, which totally makes sense. They both also have super stabilization modes, but this one makes no sense because the OnePlus 9 Pro, you're seeing this mode in 4K 30 frames per second, while the OnePlus 10 Pro is limited to 1080p, but now it goes up to 60 frames per second, but it doesn't look as good and the crop is heavier, so let me know what you think about that. I found it really weird. Alright, so let's jump into the low light comparison, and this one's a little easier because all of the differences that we saw during the day, like the more accurate and less saturated skin tone, the portrait mode is picking up less green, and the colors are nicer, and while the background blur is inconsistent on the 10 Pro, I actually don't mind it. Overall in images, the changes aren't super different, but it feels more polished and more balanced overall at night. The saturation is tamed down, so it looks a little bit more natural in this scenario. You know, food shots are super important to me, and this one looks better on the 9 Pro with a little extra saturation. The 9 Pro here, though, goes a little too drastic on the white balance, while the 10 Pro went too warm, so they both didn't nail it. But I do prefer this steak shot on the 10 Pro because the color overall is way more accurate. You are getting a purplish blue cast from the white balance being off on the 9 Pro, but having that macro mode on the 9 Pro is nice for getting up and close to food, since the 10 Pro doesn't have macro mode anymore. Sad to see that go, but you only need to worry about this if you really get up close. I don't find myself using it that much, but that's just me. But generally, the OnePlus 9 Pro without night mode creates the more saturated shot with more contrast, so when you kick on night mode, they get closer in terms of image quality, but the 10 Pro does end up creating the brighter shot overall. On this one, I can see most people preferring the OnePlus 9 Pro shot without night mode, but you can see it does pick up a little too much green across the picture. Then here it is with night mode, but I prefer the 10 Pro's processing. It has the right amount of color volume while at the same time handling the noise reduction better, especially in the sky. You can see that much better when you punch in. Another improvement that we can contribute to 10-bit color on the 10 Pro is the improvement in banding. Look at the 9 Pro's image here on night mode. When you punch in, you can see it so well in the sky, where on the 10 Pro, the sky is uniform. So that is a big deal to me. It's not like this on every picture, so don't get me wrong, you won't see this consistently across all images, but there are multiple times where I saw this. This scenario sums up the nighttime experience well in a nutshell. Here is the image with no night mode. You punch in and there is the noise difference, way more on the 10 Pro, and then you kick in night mode and they both produce cleaned up images with more dynamic range and color, but when you punch in, check the banding on the sky on the 9 Pro, where it's not perfect on the 10 Pro, but is so much better. When you crop in even further, then you can start to see artifacts and all of that. So all of these are fundamentals in photography which are improved. So I think these improvements are very important. So while the improvements aren't leaps and bounds different, it's about the subtle improvements and consistency. Like here, the lighting is handled better and controlled better. The night mode pulls more of the detail and the subtle lighting without all this mess here in the sky again. The bricks look a little cleaner and more detailed here on this shot from across the street. Images are clearer when getting closer. This is on AI mode on both cameras, and I'm surprised how different the results are. The exact same result here on this one too, so it wasn't a one-off. They both exposed for the exact same time and both were quick. Despite the white balance changes, I found the same results over and over again. So while this is the same sensor, what software improvements can do is almost mind-blowing. The downside again is where sometimes the 10 Pro does mute dominating colors, where the 9 Pro just jacks up that color to infinity. I would love to see some tweaking of the software to merge the two. The lights are a warmer color in real life, but if I had to choose, I would 90% of the time pick the images out of the OnePlus 10 Pro. So what about the wide angle at night? I know that's something that people are wondering about, and without night mode it does let more light in, which makes sense because it is a bigger sensor, but when the night mode kicks in, it does do a good job of compensating. I do still like the 9 Pro's better, but it's close. The brighter processing from the 10 Pro's general processing makes it over, but the 9 Pro remains sharper and more true to life on the image processing. Like here, the dynamic range is better on the GE sign, the brick colors are way more accurate, and the overall image is sharper. So when it comes to the ultra wide angle, unfortunately it's not an upgrade, but again, it's not as bad as what the paper specs say. In fact, sometimes it can create the better picture like this one with the exact same exposure time. The one thing to keep in mind is you can't shoot night mode across all the cameras on the OnePlus 9 Pro. For some reason, it's only the ultra wide and the main, where you can shoot 3.3x night mode shots on the OnePlus 10 Pro. It's not a huge difference anyways, but I thought that you should know. Also, the new long exposure mode on the 10 Pro makes it really easy to capture shots like this. Of course, you can just do this on Pro mode on the 9 Pro, but this one is just point and shoot, so it's nice to see. Okay, so the front-facing camera is a no-brainer in moderate low light. Look at how much better it is on the 10 Pro. It's a huge difference. When you get into dark conditions, the front-facing camera isn't the best, but it's still better than the 9 Pro. The detail on my face is so much better. The 9 Pro beautified me. Portrait mode is the same thing. The 9 Pro gave me a free filter on this portrait mode shot. In super low light, they are both pretty terrible. Lots of noise on the 10 Pro, but at least it's an improvement over the 9 Pro. If you want to see video from the front-facing cameras, it's pretty much the same deal. Brighter for sure on the 10 Pro with a lot more light coming in, so if that's what you're looking for, then it's the 10 Pro for sure, but I wouldn't call either of them good. We will end with nighttime video quality. The colors again aren't the greatest on the 9 Pro, but I was surprised to see that dynamic range was better on the 9 Pro. So take a look at these windows. You can clearly see inside the store and the brick wall that's inside. So this goes to show they have some software to work on the 10 Pro. I'm sure that we'll get more updates along the way. I think I already got a few just in the last couple of weeks. The general video overall in this lighting does look better on the 10 Pro, so I'm hopeful that they'll get this fixed over time. I guess we'll see. There is night mode video on the 9 Pro and an AI video mode on the 10 Pro, so I wanted to compare them both to see if they are different at all. This is 1080p video under these modes. This is supposed to improve color and low light performance, so let me know what you think and which one that you think looks better. I'm seeing more shadow detail here on the 10 Pro in the tree, but it also looks noisier. I do like the colors overall better on the 10 Pro though, so I'm glad that improvements were made across the board on this new phone. So in conclusion, I don't think you should get FOMO and jump straight into the OnePlus 10 Pro, but there are subtle differences all around, and those improvements add up to a new camera experience in my opinion. The Hasselblad master filters are nice, and you also get RAW Plus, which gives you computational photography baked into RAW files, so I think if you did upgrade, you won't be disappointed. The new movie mode is nice as well. I was so surprised to see how this fireworks video came out just with some ISO adjustments, so it's nice having some manual controls over video. But if you're happy with your OnePlus 9 Pro, then keep it another year, especially if you can live without the improvements that I've shown you today. But we can say that software is a very powerful thing, and improvements are very noticeable, so if you dive in, I think you'll be happy, at least on the photography side. The video still needs work. Thank you for watching, subscribe for a lot more camera comparisons just like this one, and I will see you in the next one.